by talking a little about how the Roman army worked in formation. Whenever they opposed an enemy, rather than just separating and picking off individuals, they would gather together, form these various formations, each one depending on the enemy they were opposing. And it was their close rank unity, the formations that they maintained, that kept them victorious. They were a formidable army. And much of the tactics are still used today. And so Paul is calling upon some of this, it seems, and when he's asking the people of Philippi to work together. So if I can just ask, can anyone remember what they were to work together in? And this is a really important part of the whole of Philippians. He wants them to work together in, and I think it's right there back in, if you've got your Bibles, verse 4 of chapter 1. Anyone remember, what are they working together in? The business partnership. They're in a business. It's a really important thing to remember. We said at the outset, the church is a business enterprise. It has to be remembered. It has a very specific purpose. It requires to produce a profit. What is a profit? What is the growth of a church? It's not fiscal. It's not about growing bank balances. It's about growing people. Two sides to that. Growing people in maturity, in faith, and simultaneously growing a church numerically in order to influence the earth for Jesus Christ. So in that business, Paul wants to talk, and it's what he's doing in chapter 2, something about how that business functions. I don't know do we have any businessmen or women here? Yeah. I know Caroline runs a little business of her own. Anybody else? Yeah? No, but look, what Paul is going to give us, okay, some of the detail on how to run this business effectively. If we're to make disciples, if we're to mature believers, our chief purpose, then Paul is giving us some of the detail of what that will look like. In order for us to be effective disciple makers, and in order for us to grow in maturity together, Paul is looking at this. And I've labeled it church unity. My heading is this: conduct that leads to church unity, or conduct leading to church unity. So, verse 2 of chapter 2, he says, "Then make my joy complete by being like-minded." Paul's already joyful. He's really happy already. He says that earlier on. And look in verse 5, he says, I just read to you, because of your partnership in the gospel, let me start back, verse 4. "I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel." Paul's happy with this church. And he's happy with this church because they've entered the business arrangement. They've understood what their salvation was about. God saved them to save other people. He's happy about that. Now he wants that business arrangement to flourish. And so verse 2, "Make my joy complete." Okay, let that joy continue and grow by being like-minded. How do you run a business? Like-minded, this is what the Greek means. Set your minds on the same thing, or setting your minds on one thing. When you set up a business, you have to know, don't you, what the purpose of your business is. Otherwise it's not going to go anywhere, is it? Okay. We've already said the purpose of the gospel business that we engage in is to make disciples and grow in maturity for the glory of God. And so he wants that to be the main thing. Look, make my joy complete by being like-minded. That is, make me happy by continuing to remember what it's all about. Let me ask the question. We come to church this morning, haven't we? Why? Why are we here? Why do we meet? What's our purpose? What is our mission statement? We've got part of it there. It's half of a statement, isn't it? Make Christ known so that men and women become disciples and grow as Christians. And I think it's really important. Paul's point is this: we have to remember what it's about. We have to remind ourselves. Think about it when you come to church. Think about it when you're driving. Think about it when you go to work. Think about it Saturday, next Saturday. What a tremendous opportunity to make Christ known in order to make disciples and make mature disciples. And so Paul, he wants this asserted at the beginning. If this business is going to work, we have to know what it's about. And we all have to be committed to that one purpose. Be like-minded. Every one of us in our church here has to be certain that we're about making disciples. We're about growing in our faith. Because there's an issue here at Philippi. They've lost something of that purpose, of their identity and what it's all really about. And it's happened in Luke chapter 4. You've got two ladies here, Euodia and Syntyche. And he says to them, I plead with these two ladies. Look, they may just have been men as well. And, just happens to be these two ladies. I plead with you, agree with each other in the Lord. Okay? So there's some division. They've lost something of their single-mindedness. They've lost something of what they're about. And instead they're distracted by other things. Don't worry, Jeff, if you can't get it going, we can manage without it. Okay? And so, again, back in chapter 2, he wants them to be gospel-minded. Be like-minded. I think one thing the gospel does do, as much as we're to be like-minded and have this purpose, our diversity is welcome. Jesus isn't calling for us all to be the same. Here's what a commentator writes. Paul is not asking for them to have the same thoughts or feelings about everything. Paul is not squelching human creativity, nor is he prohibiting personal diversity. He is calling his friends to seek the same goal with one mind. It's okay to be different. I am very different to Trevor. Handsome young man. Okay? Well, that's what Ruth said to me this morning. She saw him coming up the steps and says, look at that Montaz, a handsome young man. Okay? We can have our differences, but the purpose has to be the same. And that diversity is brilliant for the gospel. You see, what helps us to connect with our world when we want to engage them with the gospel is our diversity. We're so different and able to relate across the board with people. So we're to keep the gospel and its purpose as the thing that unites us. We can have all our differences. You can like golf, you can hate golf. You can be tall, dark and handsome. Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad, is it? Or you can just be ordinary Joe Bloggs. We can be all of that, but the gospel has got to unite us. And so he moves on. And this is, in order for the gospel to unite us, he says, there's got to be between us the same love. Look, having the same love. Look, at the beginning he says, earlier on he says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from God's love. So the love that we're to have working in our church, in our hearts, in our lives, is the love that exists in God. It's God's love. And here's what we learn about God's love. I've said this to you before, I'm sure. God's love is a love that works in relationship. For God to be love, there has to be an object for his love. For our God, and the Bible says, doesn't it, God is love, 1 John 4. But for in order for love to exist and to operate, it has to have an object on which that love is expressed. How did God love before we were around? Who did God love before we were around? Thank you, Catherine. You didn't hear that, so we'll ignore Catherine. Someone else have a go, because that is the right answer. Who did God love? How was God love if before we were created? Was it the angels? What, where and who and on whom did God express love before he made us? Loved his Son, and the Son loved the Father, and God existed. That's why his love has existed in loving relationship. God has never not been in a loving relationship. His identity of love is tied up with the loving relationship that God has always existed in. And within that loving relationship, God has been in partnership with his Son. And the two of them, together with the Spirit of God, have been in a partnership, first of all, to create a world, then to create a world of people, and then in partnership work in love towards the goal of winning people to themselves. And they did that. And within that partnership, God orchestrates and lays out a pattern for saving people. And his Son, as a part of that partnership, in loving response to his Father, comes to the earth and gives his life for us. The Spirit in that partnership gives his power, uses his power to call us to faith. Carolyn and I were listening to a part of the Bible on the way here this morning and talking about how many are called but few are chosen. How the reason we're in faith is because we've been called by God to faith. And so something of the partnership, and it's that love that kind of is the oil of that machine that is in God that has to be within us. What's going to make us work as a gospel enterprise, as a gospel machine, is that yes, we've got to be single-minded and understand what it's about. It's about making disciples. But love has got to be what brings us together, what sorts out our differences, what enables us to work together. There's got to be this love that works within the Trinity, that makes the Trinity work, is the love that has to make us work together in unison. Let God's love work in us. Ephesians 5 talks about something of what love looks like. I heard it at Nikki's wedding yesterday. Christ loved the church. Wow. What does that mean? How do I know he loves us? How does he love us? Words are so cheap, aren't they? How did Christ love the church? How do we know he loves the church? He said so and gave himself. Okay? Can you see? So here's something about love. Love is something, I heard at the wedding yesterday, love is a commitment that captures some of it. There's more. It's always, when you're a preacher and when you hear other preachers, you're always like, can I have a go at that too? Yeah, it is a commitment, there's more to it. It's a commitment, yes, it's an action. Love is an action. Christ loved the church. How do we know? Show me Jesus. Okay? How do we know Jesus loves the church? Because he laid down his life for her. How do we know we love each other? How are we going to do gospel work together? We have to be prepared to lay down our lives for one another. It's the only way that we're going to work together for the gospel. Next, being one in spirit and purpose. This is a real unity of harmony, of working together in a harmonious way. It's a deep camaraderie, something of a military nature, when we are working together in unison, having the same purpose, having love as the basis for it, but then working together in sync. We cannot have one person in a church doing gospel work in a single-minded purpose themselves, and another purpose, and another person, and another person in each of their individual ways. There has to be something of working similarly, having a similar purpose, working out how we do this together. The only way that Spring Fair is going to work next week is that everyone knows how we're working together. There has to be that one purpose. I think one way to describe this is, do you remember when you were back at school? I know it was a while ago for me. The three-legged, the sack race, or what do we call that? It is a three-legged race. I thought it was, and I thought I was wrong. The three-legged race, where when you're tied to somebody, there's only one way you can do well in that race. Okay? Yeah, you got your purpose. You've got to get to the end. So there's your goal. That's your gospel. But there's only one way you're going to do it. You have to work in cooperation. There has to be this one in purpose and spirit. You have to at least have a conversation beforehand. You have to explain to each other, we have to move our feet together, okay? We're doing it together now. And then it's only then and only then. And you know what it's like when you're watching kids do it. You have no idea how to work in collaboration with each other, okay? They're just falling over constantly. And so Paul wants this agreement. This is how we're going to do it. This is the gospel. We've got to make disciples and mature believers for God's glory. And this is how we're going to go about it. This is going to be our strategy. Which means the church has to have a vision. A church has to have a strategy for how to achieve that vision. And a church has to agree together on how, on that process, so that we can do it together. Having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. And then he breaks it down further. In order for that to work, do nothing out of selfish ambition. It's set against, back in chapter 1, when he says, in the gospel work that Paul was involved in, that some people were preaching Christ out of selfish ambition, wanting to look good, wanting to have a following of people, wanting to be better than Paul. Remember, they were all in competition with Paul. They hated the fact that Paul was making disciples, and now that he was in prison, it was their chance to get their ambition and they themselves become the ones in the limelight. And so Paul is saying, in gospel work, in order for this machine to work, none of us can have a personal agenda. Pastors particularly, I think, Paul, I'm going to preach to myself here. Pastors can have an agenda. Do you know what a growing church does for a pastor? That's why I got my jacket on today. I'm feeling some growth's going to come, and I'm going to be the one who's going to look good for it. You know what pastors do when they get together? I hate it. Talk about how big their churches are. Or they hang around in cliques with the pastors of similar sized churches. The pastors with big churches, you go to a conference, they're never hanging around with the pastors of small churches. And Paul is saying, hey, this isn't about your ambition and your kudos. Get that out of the way. And whether it's a pastor or a lame person in a church, there must be nothing about self in this. Whether it's the self of wanting to be important in church or wanting to look good to the outside world or the community, there must be nothing of selfishness, nothing of personal gain, of temporal personal glory, or of personal ambition. That has to go. Do nothing out of selfish ambition. It continues, but in humility. And that's the key. It's difficult in the Greco-Roman world because in that world, humility was seen as something detrimental. It was seen as a shortcoming if you were humble. It's a bit of the culture. Although I was raised in a completely Western environment, and it's the only world I know, grew up with English and Irish foster parents, my heritage, my birth heritage is Bangladeshi, and I know within that community, when in the times I've interacted with it, humility also is seen as something really negative. And it's all about speaking well and presenting yourself well. In the Christian world, it's the complete opposite, entirely opposite. It's humility. It's this sense of considering ourselves, or rather our needs, as ranking lower than the needs of others. Here's how one commentator, Fee, explains it. Others in the community are not necessarily better than I am, but their needs and concerns surpass mine. So there needs to be this humility, verse 3, and then verse 4, the rest of verse 3, considering others better than ourselves. And so here I'm looking out at you. I'm standing much higher than you. I'm already a tall person, so this is making me look even taller. Okay, excuse me. And it's easy to have this mindset that I'm way up there compared to you guys, way down there. And that is some of the historic reason for why these pulpits were set up on high, where ministers were elevated to this level of superiority over their congregation, which is in complete contradiction to everything that Jesus demonstrated in his ministry, is he not? Now, the only reason I'm up here is because I'm a little smaller than some of you, okay? And so you can see me, right? You didn't have to say yes there, Keith. You could have disagreed with me. Goodness sake, we don't need one of them in our church, do we? Okay. Right. And so, hey, when we come here, when we look at each other, in order for this business to work, we've got to look at each other as being those who bring better ideas to the table. Those who bring something better to contribute to this church. Let's come with that mindset that I have the least to offer this church, and that Jack or Jill or Jane has far more to offer than me. What they say is of greater significance and weight than what I have to say. And I think that's what Paul is saying. And therefore, when we look at each other, consider others better than ourselves. Hey, when we sit down to talk about gospel work and to plan how we're going to make disciples at Dernancourt, let's give deference to one another. Others have something far more significant to contribute than however great I might think my ideas are, and however brilliant I might think I am. I have to come into this setting as the least of the least. Dear friends, that's how we work together in this business. We have to remember what it's about: making disciples, maturing disciples. It's got to be the love of Jesus working in our hearts that teaches us what true partnership looks like. It's working in harmony together, and we're going to see that beautifully next week. I remember from last year, and I'm just looking forward to this year too, to see a church so well organized in working together. It's that's got to overflow into every area of our church's life, not just once a year, but every Sunday, every gathering, every planning meeting, every CAT group, every council meeting, every prayer time, every music rehearsal, every communion service. Can you imagine how chaotic communion would be if everybody just had a free-for-all? And may that flow. It's that would lead us to becoming effective, Dernancourt Uniting, in being a growing, maturing church, being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose, doing nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility considering others better than ourselves. Each of you not looking to your own interests, but to the interests of others. And may God grant me grace, and you and us, to do so for his glory.